Hey guys, Eric Knight here. Today is December 20th, 2012. I wanted to do a review on this article my buddy sent me, kind of wanted my opinions on it. This article comes from the Huffington Post. It's put out yesterday by Bob Seska. Article's titled Debunking the Gun Culture Propaganda, because we all know we never get any propaganda coming out of the left-wing media. The article starts out, it's just been over 8 years since the assault weapons ban expired, and in that time, new gun control bills have been scarce. There are a variety of reasons for deafening legislative silence, including a cowardly lack of political will and a river of gun industry cash flows into campaign war chests every day, but it's also because radical gun left fetishists, led by the NRA, have been supremely effective with clever marketing and misinformation campaigns intended to undermine the brutal realities of the American gun culture. I find this a little bit interesting. I believe the NRA is one of the biggest lobbying groups in Washington. However, could it have anything to do with crime statistics? I mean, is that just maybe one rational thought? Is it possible that crime statistics have actually went down dramatically as gun ownership has went up and concealed carry permits have went up in this country? Just a thought, maybe. But again, as I've said before, I think people should go look at the FBI's website, look at the crime statistics, and then decide for yourself. So it breaks these things down into propaganda versus reality. Now the first one goes, the propaganda. Guns don't kill people, people kill people. That's obviously what you hear people from the right saying. And the reality, they say, is this is probably the most prevalent yet silliest line. No, an inanimate object can't spring to life and kill anyone, but a gun's intrinsic purpose is to kill, wound, and threaten living beings. And he's absolutely right. It's why they exist, period. The firearms used at Aurora, Tucson, Sandy Hook, and so many other mass shootings, which mostly gang violence, are specifically categorized as assault rifles. The intention by definition is to assault. They are aggressive weapons intended to physically attack and do harm. Otherwise, they would be called defense weapons or protection weapons. So no, guns don't kill people, but people with guns and bullets kill lots of people. Around 30,000 plus deaths per year in America. Well, what's the overwhelming cause of those deaths? Is it 30,000 deaths caused by mass shootings? Or, as I've said before, I think the mass shootings makes it like something like 15th on the list. But 30,000 plus deaths a year, most of these result from suicides. We'll touch on that a little bit later. They do have a piece on that in here, which is a good thing, I think. But assault rifles. Well, every weapon, as they said before, is designed to assault. That's their purpose. And I really don't know if the author of this article has any real knowledge of why we have a Second Amendment in the first place. It's not so people can necessarily go out and hunt and just decide they want guns to go out and kill their neighbors. It's to protect against tyranny, which I'm starting to think a lot of these people on the left openly would love to live in some form of tyranny or some sort of authoritarian collectivist utopia. So, next piece of propaganda. I do hear this a lot, and it's kind of like comparing apples to oranges. But cars kill a lot of people, and no one wants to ban them. Reality. How do we deal with cars in America compared to how we deal with guns in America? Cars and drivers are heavily regulated by the government, from emission standards to annual inspection, safety features, and so forth. You can't legally drive a car that doesn't feature seatbelts or a car that spews too much exhaust into the air. You have to take both a written and behind-the-wheel test to get a license to operate a car. You often have to renew that license at regular intervals. If you're older, you have to prove that you're physically capable of driving. You can't drive a car while drinking alcohol impaired by other chemicals. You can't drive a car. You're not supposed to drive a car when you're impaired, but how many people get behind the wheel impaired all the time? I think, some of these people get pulled over or they might have sobriety checkpoints on the highway depending on what event is going on. But far more people are driving home every single day completely impaired, and they get caught when they either run into something, they kill somebody, they injure somebody, they fall asleep at the wheel, or they drive. They're so impaired they can't keep the car between the lanes. They get picked up that way. However, more often than not, these people do make it home safely. When somebody's gun goes off, like let's say my gun goes off in my living room here, I'm cleaning it, and it's loaded. Good chance the cops are going to show up at my door. If I shoot somebody, good chance somebody's going to come up to my door. There's an investigation and criminal prosecution. I mean, it's kind of the same with drinking and driving, but I think this article is making the assumption, as I've heard so many times making this argument, that there's really no gun regulations out there. Again, when I bought my gun, I had to go through a very extensive, thorough background check, sat there for over an hour, waiting for everything to clear, and that was pretty easy for Utah. I think a lot of states, things are a lot different. I know people that can't buy guns. So not everybody can just go out and buy a gun, especially if they have mental problems. It's just like this Lanza. I don't think it's, even talking with people I know very closely in law enforcement, they're basically saying there's no way this kid could have went into a gun store and purchased a gun on his own. So, next bit. You can kill someone just as easily with a knife as you can kill with a gun. And again, this is kind of a silly argument. But reality, they say, outrageously wrong. Ask any average soldier whether they prefer to attack an enemy with a knife or their rifle. After they laugh in your face, they'll obviously tell you they prefer their rifle. Well, I look at it this way. Let's say some guy kicks down your door, comes in your house, whether he's armed or not, or he has a knife, or just his bare hands, and he's trying to come in and steal something. If you fire a warning shot, what do you think this guy's going to do? Do you think he's just going to proceed up the stairs and see who's got the gun? Or do you think he's going to get the hell out of your house? He's going to get the hell out of your house. So, again, kind of a silly argument, but my point is, just going back to the idea of people killing people, which is a relevant argument because people do kill people. If they want to kill you, they're going to find a way to do it. Whether they suffocate you, there's a million ways a person could try to find a way to kill you. So, even if you look at this shooting we had, was it on a Wyoming campus the other day? Some guy sniping people with his bow and arrow. If people want to kill, they're going to find a way to kill. Here's the propaganda. It's safer to own a gun in the house or concealed on your person. Nope, not true. I'll let the conservative analyst and former Bush speechwriter David Frum take this one. A gun in the house minimally doubles the risk that a household member will kill himself or herself. Some studies put the increase in suicide risk as high as 10 times. An American is 50% more likely to be shot dead by his or her own hand than be shot dead by a criminal assailant. More than 30,000 Americans injure themselves with guns every year. And again, like I said before, the bulk of these injuries and people that die are suicide victims. It's not necessarily mass shootings. That's a very small percentage of this 30,000. So, kind of like I said in my previous video, a lot of these people, or especially returning military veterans, are on some sort of a psychotropic drug that renders them maybe more desensitized or puts them in a mental state where they're not stable. Of course, yes, they end up killing themselves. I'm not saying that's the root cause, but I'm thinking, again, we need to bring more of these things into the conversation. One of these last ones here, this is probably one of my favorites. Especially if you look at how criminal our government has gotten these days. Banning guns won't stop mass shootings because of outlaws, blah, blah, blah. Once again, totally not true. Australia, May 1996, a lone gunman killed 35 people and wounded an additional 23. Subsequently, Australia passed a very strict gun control law that included a buyback program that managed to recover 600,000 assault rifles and other guns, 20% of all the known firearms in Australia. Oh, so a lot of people kept their guns. Great. There were no more private sales of firearms. There were stringent registration laws, like we have here. And as with other nations, you had to prove to the authorities that you had a specific reason for purchasing a firearm, and no, according to the slate, self-defense wasn't a valid excuse. What happened after that? Goes on to show that homicides by firearms plunged 59% between 1995 and 2006, with no corresponding increase in non-firearm related homicides. Suicide rates dropped, which is good news. I'd like to point out another fact that I got just here in the United States, and this was measuring a time frame between 1960 as well as 2008, from 1960 to 2008, where they had a handgun ban and trigger lock law that became effective in 1976 and expired in 2008. During the years in which the D.C. handgun ban and trigger lock law was in effect, the D.C. murder rate averaged 73% higher than it was at the outset of the law, while the U.S. murder rate averaged 11% lower. No different than I've said about Chicago, how they have some of the strictest gun laws and horrible, horrible crime rates in this country. One other thing I'd like to say is, I mean, you can go and be very selective in the countries that you choose. Why don't we talk about what happened in Mexico? How about we talk about the U.S. government trafficking and shipping guns into Mexico and the Fast and Furious operation that led to many, 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 many deaths. They have some of the strictest gun laws in Mexico, and they have horrendous crime, huge drug war down there. So that, and if you want to look at how we've been trafficking guns to Syria, trying to prompt war over there, why aren't we talking about these issues? Of course, it wouldn't be convenient to feed your propaganda and all those weak minds out there that are going to buy all this BS hook, line, and sinker. So that's my analysis on this article. I think it's important that people actually read some of these other articles to get a different perspective. You know, you shouldn't just look at right-wing media or alternative media, left-wing, libertarian, whatever. I think you need to look at all sides of the issues, then come to a conclusion for yourself. But I like to call it like I see it. I think there's a lot of BS in this article. I think there's a lot of other information we could throw in, such as, well, there was no mention of Columbine ever happening during the assault weapons ban. Horrible mass shooting. What happens after we renew an assault weapons ban? Well, there's going to be more shootings. That's obvious. And it's a slippery slope from there. So thank you for tuning in. That's my analysis. We'll have much more to talk about later on tomorrow. This is the Eric Knight Show.